Before we start, I just wanted to thank again Steffi and the DLD Dream Team and ask you all to give a big round of applause to Steffi Czerny and the DLD Dream Team.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Here are the dreams.
Okay, could we... Fantastic. I just want to reiterate how excited we are. This is the first time the three of us have been able to get together since You Know What started, and so it's we're deeply grateful to Steffi, to the team, and we recently launched a new book, and so this is also the first time we're able to talk about it and share the new book publicly with you all. So what we're going to do is a kind of quick-fire tour through our two books and an exhibition that, in a way, track what has happened to the idea of the present in the last decade or so. But first, we want to start with a world-exclusive announcement. Do we not, Hans-Ulrich?
Yeah, exactly, because it is indeed the first time in more than 18 months that the three of us meet, thanks to DLD here and BMW. So we're also very grateful to BMW, very grateful to DLD, and it's this first meeting, and we had breakfast this morning, and we had the idea for the third volume. And it's always the same process. It usually happens very spontaneously. We have, the plan is really that we do 10 books. No? So we're now done with number 2. We're going to present the second book, but it is in Munich today, on occasion of this conference, that the third volume was invented, and it's always the same principle. Doug then writes it in handwriting, the title, on a post-it or on a piece of paper, because I have this Instagram account where I protest against the disappearance of doodling and handwriting to kind of maintain handwriting. I post every day these notes, and this is the title, and Doug and Shumon are going to tell you more. How are you?
That's a very loaded question these days, isn't it? I think 2 years ago it meant something very different than what it means right now. No?
And so the reason that we've decided that our next book will be called How Are You is, as Doug just said, that certainly before 18 months ago, it felt like one of the most simple questions that you could ask anybody that you knew, or maybe also somebody, more importantly, that you didn't know and that you just met. And ever since that moment, we've realized that to answer that properly would be to delve into a 12-hour therapy session that would reveal all the different ways in which your life, the life of your family, your friends, and again, the whole space-time continuum around you has seemed to transform into something alien and unfamiliar. And the reality is that if you were to answer the question, how are you, you would have to probably answer in a kind of hybridized answer. It would be 35% anxiety, 35% peacefulness, and the rest would be a simple what the fuck. So we, the three of us have been working on, as I say, 2 books and an exhibition, and we'll be working on many other books and many other projects, hopefully well into the dusk of our lives. The first book was called The Age of Earthquakes, which came out in 2015, and the most recent book, which DLD and Steffi have very kindly given to every single one of you, and we're really touched by this generosity, is called The Extreme Self, and that literally just came out in the last 2 months. So Doug, perhaps we could start by telling people what the inspiration was for the first book and how that sets up the kind of format that we've been dealing with.
Okay. Well, I'm Canadian, and there was a very, probably one of the most interesting thinkers ever. It was Marshall McLuhan, who was probably the first official media theorist. He was someone my age, at the University of Toronto, and to oversimplify things, he basically threw a strange and unrepeatable chain of ontological circumstances foresaw the internet about 40 to 50 years before it happened. And I know his family and his foundation says, no, he did, but he really did. He didn't quite get the interface, but he knew what the internet was going to be and how it was going to affect our heads. So I was very lucky to write a biography about him. But then in the late 60s, in 68, he and two designers, Quentin Fiore and
Jerome
Agel, did a pocketbook, which back then pocketbooks were kind of subversive and like, oh boy, it's a pocketbook. And that explained his theories in a sort of a hyper-simplified manner. And so we wanted to recreate this experience with the age of earthquakes, but to explain what the three of us, we first met about 10 years ago, we're changing, aren't we? How are we? This is freaking us out. And so we've been sort of monitoring our own interior lives, our collective interior and exterior lives, and hence this book and The Age of Earthquakes.
And maybe, Hans-Ulrich, you could say something about the sort of nervous system of how we work together, but also with a whole cast list of different people.
Yeah, I actually found the notes from this first meeting, a bit like today, the first meeting for the third volume, and there were a couple of questions. I mean, the idea that in the past, the future used to be distant, and in a way, we also felt that now we are living in the future. So the future has kind of become the present tense, and that there is also an issue that actually we seemingly, I mean, as Niklas Marx showed in a recent article on a data center, which burned, and where actually a lot of data seemingly on the cloud, disappeared. So seemingly we don't have to remember the past anymore because it's on the cloud, right? So there are kind of 3 points of departure, and we thought also it would be interesting to kind of, because obviously a book can also be an exhibition, no? So we felt it would be interesting to invite artists, and it connects a lot to what Hans and Ez were talking about in terms of collaboration. It's not only the collaboration between the three of us, but it's the collaboration with many different artists who are invited to design pages. So the book becomes a kind of, in the Duchamp sense, a portable exhibition. And of course, an exhibition which can go to the people, an exhibition which can go beyond the walls of the museum.
Yeah.
And there's this idea, we've all heard of feedback, but there was a term that Marshall McLuhan had also, which was feed forward. And I think that's also very interesting to think about in our broader theme today about the circular economy, or thinking about vectors of movement, that sometimes they go forward, sometimes they go backwards, and knowing which direction, when, is really the key thing. So what we're going to do now is share a number of pages that we felt are speaking most saliently, again, about the themes that we've encountered today, about our relationship to the planet, but also how our internal architecture, the architecture of our feelings, has this very direct and profound impact on something as large as the planet itself. So we'll just read out some of this, and then...
Shumon, let me say, before we begin here, what we're about to read right now, this happened after the 2013 earthquake in Fukushima. And I began to wonder, is there some way that human beings could have somehow triggered that or made that happen, and hence this?
Exactly. So 20 years ago, the internet used 0% of human energy consumption. Today, the digital economy uses 10% of the world's total electricity. It's the same amount that was used to light the entire planet in 1985. Transporting data now uses 50% more energy than world aviation. This amount will grow and grow and grow and grow. The carbon that fuels our electronic life is melting the ice caps. The shifting weight of millions of billions of tons of melting ice is relieving vast gravitational pressure from the Earth's crust. And the book came out in 2015, and we've noticed that within the last year, actually, and particularly during lockdown, as millions and millions, if not billions of people fled onto streaming services while in lockdown, that we're beginning to see more accurate attempts at trying to measure the ecological impact of our data consumption. And so the remains of the Ice Age vanish in a few decades. The Japanese earthquake of 2011 was no coincidence. We haven't just changed the structure of our brains these past few years, we've changed the structure of our planet. Doug, maybe you want to say something about what we've just seen.
I think that when we began these two books, I think putting forth the hypothesis that our brains might actually be changing was actually seen as sort of ridiculous and implausible. I was on this TV show in Sydney, Australia. It's on a Sunday night, and they have local people and whoever's in Australia that night. And we were talking about our pre-internet brains and our post-internet brains. And the MC was saying, well, that's ridiculous. Brains don't change. And by just coincidence, the world's leading neuroscientist was at the other end. He said, no, that's not true at all. Of course they can change, and we are changing. And I think ideas that seemed ludicrous 10 years ago are now just commonplace, not almost like beyond even thinking about. Really. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so this is why we then coined this phrase, the age of earthquakes, and we say, welcome to the age of earthquakes. But of course, we could annotate this and say, welcome to the age of earthquakes and fires and floods and plagues. And it's as if the Old Testament is now a kind of futurist prophecy document. If we want to know what's going to happen in the next week, we simply go back to the Old Testament because it's all there, which is also a connection to the fact that I think the most profound futurists were also always historians. And Hans-Ulrich will talk about Ulrich Obrist in a minute. And so we have this page where we say, the unintended side effects of technology dictate our future. Our only true hope is that we invent something smarter than ourselves. If we did, what could it be? Hans-Ulrich?
Yeah, actually, it's of course interesting also in the context of DLD to talk about the changes, no, which happened through digital life. And I was actually thinking, Doug, you have just written a piece in The Observer about Elon Musk. Can you tell us about that? It kind of connects this image.
Oh boy, there's so much stuff that happened. Okay, which
Elon, the piece you wrote about.
No, of course. I mean, there's about the centuries. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think I come out of the 20th century, and I'm a certain age, and I remember the way things used to be, and now we're in the 21st century. And what I said about Elon Musk is that in the 20th century, we thought about the future, and what could the future be? And here in the 21st century, we're just trying to think of a future, any future, a plausible future. And I think the attractive thing about Elon Musk is that he still sees the future in an era when most people don't. So I think that's probably the point.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us then to the century and to Hobsbawm, no, in a way.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect segue, actually, into the beginning of our new book, The Extreme Self, whose subtitle is Age of You. And so this is how the new book starts. The 20th century was about what belongs to who. The 21st century is about who belongs to what. So that's also an interesting parallel to what you just said about Elon Musk and the future and a future.
Yeah.
For thousands of years, Earth's resources have been extracted by bodies, most of whom were not free. But now it's our bodies and ourselves being extracted, and mostly we offer it up for free. By merely existing, you're leaving a huge data smudge in the world, and more precisely, it's up in the cloud forever. The cloud is the new infinity.
Well, it's true. I think time perception, I still remember this. I feel like such a fuddy-duddy, but it used to be based on your everyday perceived organic experience, and you really didn't have many, for lack of a better expression, dopamine hits. And I think now that we're in this century, we expect and crave and need and possibly are addicted to a time sense that is based on having a dopamine hit very, very quickly, boom, boom, boom. And so time's no longer about time. Time is about data. And so in a weird way, data has replaced time and the cloud has become infinity.
It's actually interesting, DLD is, of course, also a big archive. And you can see in the archive a conference about 6-7 years ago about the cloud. And it was very interdisciplinary. It included Werner Vogel, who is, of course, from Amazon, but it included Enzensberger, Hans Magnus Enzensberger, the poet who wrote Poetry of Cloud. It included Hubert Damisch, the late Hubert Damisch, who wrote Theory of Cloud, a book on Constable, and painting of clouds. And it included Liz Diller, the architect, who actually designed in Everdon a building.
Oh, the cloud pavilion.
Yeah,
it was beautiful.
It was a beautiful pavilion of a cloud. So for those of you who know more about clouds, you can go to the DLD archive and see the cloud panel.
So welcome to Age of You. And one of the things that we then pursue as the book is organized into 13 chapters, and it's inspired by another book that has become our guiding star this time, which is called The Age of Extremes by Eric Hobsbawm, which Hans-Ulrich will talk about in a minute. But the thing that we realized is a kind of seismic and paradigm shift from the 20th to the 21st century, is that in the 20th century, the most valuable resource, the one that shaped geopolitics and the history of the 20th century, were fossil resources, was fossil fuel, which were things that we would dig or frack from the ground and the sea. And now we've moved into a different kind of capitalism. It has different names. Shoshana Zuboff calls it surveillance capitalism. It could be called computational capitalism or even informational capitalism. But we prefer to call it emotional capitalism, because actually the most important and valuable resource today is how each and every one of you feels at every single millisecond of every single day. Yeah. And the way in which those feelings are being mined, they're being extracted, they're being commodified, and then ultimately sold back for you to consume yourself.
I think that is the big plot twist of the last 5 years in particular. I do remember back in the early 90s and say working at Wired magazine, and the internet was about 20 minutes old back then, and everyone thought it's going to be free, it's going to be happy, and I'm actually surprised it took until about 5 years ago before the internet turned evil. And I think we all expected the future to be about data and information, but it's not. The plot twist is that it's all about your feelings and how you can extract feelings and feed them back and lasso them and turn them into something else.
Exactly. And so just a few more pages here, again, things that we think are appropriately resonant with the different topics of today's discussions. We were wondering, do you still feel like an individual? 20 years ago, this question would have made no sense. Now everybody knows what it means. We all know that we are changing inside our heads quickly, too quickly. Up until recently, people were simply people. Now we are turning into something else. We all feel it, and we all know it. Doug?
Oh, and the whole process has been utterly accelerated in the last 18 months or so. What does it mean to be you or me? Which gets back to the question of how are you? What is it? The notion of being oneself now is turned into work. It's turned into a job. It's turned into curating the sense of yourself that you put forward. It's for harvesting likes. It's for fending off trolls. It's become this entirely different thing of what it has meant up until about 20 years ago in human existence. And it's exhausting, and it's unprecedented, and it looks like it's not going to slow down. It's going to accelerate. We all know that. So where might it be heading? And I think everyone has just acknowledged this. If there's any people who are in doubt, they're gone now. We all just know it's happening.
So the age of you is the new age of extremes. Hans-Ulrich?
Yeah, so that actually brings us to Eric Hobsbawm. And I think one thing which is very important, you see, we had this afternoon Hans Zimmer and also S. Devlin talking to us all about the importance of listening, how important it is to learn to listen again. And for me, my practice to basically listen is of course key, because I have all these conversations and record all these conversations, but it's also listening in a very transgenerational way, as Grace Lee Boggs said. And I think we need to listen more to very old people also, people who have an experience of a century. So whenever I'm in a city, when I was in Paris, I would always listen to Pierre Klosowski or to Ethel Adnan. And then I moved to London in 2006, and I went to Doris Lessing and to Eric Hobsbawm, right, who were then in their 90s, and was listening to them. And Eric wrote this amazing book, The Age of Extreme, which is interesting actually to reread now, about the short 20th century, right, which is the century from World War I to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And interesting to talk about that in Munich, because of course, Oqvi and Wezer did these seminal exhibitions about, also very inspired by Hobsbawm, about the short century. And Andrea Lissoni is here, the new director of the Haus der Kunst. So there's a great Munich connection here. So I would go as part of this, transgeneration endeavor every week to Hobsbawm and just listen to him and learn. And he talked about technology, about religion. One must say that he's really great at titles, amazing at titles. He talked about, basically the failures, as he saw it, of state socialism, of capitalism, very related to what Shoshana Zuboff says, the failures of nationalism, and about the research of this book, of The Age of Extreme. And when I kind of asked him to project and think about the 21st century, which is of course what we are addressing here in the book, he said that the world in the third millennium will almost certainly continue to be one of violent politics and violent political change. The only thing uncertain about them is where they will lead. If humanity is to have a recognizable future, it cannot be by prolonging the past or the present. It's another interesting statement. And he was also talking about the fact that actually social distribution and not growth would actually dominate, the politics and economics of the century. And it's kind of interesting when I reread that, it actually made me think a lot about what Kate Raworth is talking about, an extraordinary book. It's The Donut Economics, a book which is super relevant in relation to almost everything which is discussed, I think, under this theme of circular economy. Because Kate, initially worked in the United Nations and then at Oxfam and, campaigned for the environment. And then actually, as an economist, realized that a completely different economy was necessary. So she started with this idea that we need to think about human well-being at the center of this new economy. And she came up with the donut. The donut economics, there's an inner ring of well-being and there's an outer ring which actually protects the life support system of the planet. And she says we need to find a safe space, between the planetary and the social boundaries, and has developed a whole theory, a whole movement. And today, many politicians and mayors are listening to her. So the book really gets implemented in society, the Dutch government, for example, and many other European governments. Yeah.
As we're running out of time, we're going to sort of swiftly move through these last few pages. We're not built for so much change so quickly. Technology has outrun our ability to absorb it. And here, again, a few pages that talk about our relationship to work and to labor, and particularly the experiences that we've had over the last 18 months or so. Is there any job that's 100% future-proof. Machines will quite soon be outsourcing their work to humans because it'll be the cheaper option. That's a very interesting and provocative thing for us to think about if we're thinking about the circular economy in its full implications. And if we, this is something we have just lived through and we're still living through. If we all get sick, then shopping's really in trouble.
I would like to add on that.
Please.
One. That actually began as one statement was, if we all get sick of shopping, then we're really in trouble. And then we just change it. If we all get sick, shopping's in trouble. So it's a nice plot twist.
Plot twist. This is our kind of politigram, which actually illustrates what Hans-Ulrich just talked about vis-a-vis the new political landscape. And as we become less powerful, do we become more extreme? And again, we've been talking about the circular economy today, but of course the circular economy is but one of many economies that are familiar, but several that are unfamiliar, and maybe even more that we have yet to see. And here are a few examples of them. So just to finish off, we thought we have 10 seconds, hopefully we have 2 minutes more, if that's okay. We're just a couple of projects that we wanted to come back to the climate, back to ecology, back to ecological thinking. And so we've just included 2 recent projects from Hans-Ulrich and Douglas. So Hans-Ulrich, maybe just want to say something about Remember Nature.
Yeah, Remember Nature was just published a few weeks ago as part of the Serpentine Back to Earth project, where we invited artists to not come up with an exhibition, but with environmental campaigns, how we could actually work with resources differently in a more circular way. And rather than to just have only theories and ideas, we thought it would be interesting to go back to a DIY idea, right? So actually 140 artists who have somehow ecological subjects in the center of their activity would write instruction pieces, DIY pieces, open scars, and everybody somehow reads the book, can then do them and can implement them. So in a way, it's about production of reality. It's a little manual. It's a very similarly small book to the Extreme Self, very portable.
And Doug, you've been working on a number of projects recently.
Well, I come from Vancouver, Canada, which is actually the birthplace of Greenpeace. And I grew up sort of indoctrinated by Greenpeace. And in my lifetime, I still remember when people used to litter. I mean, people, they'd just like drop shit on the ground and like not think about it. And that stopped. I remember when there was this thing called acid rain, which kept me awake for a few decades, and now acid rain's been fixed. And then there was this thing called the ozone hole, which was going to kill us all, and that was very quietly fixed. No one ever actually wrote an article saying, the ozone hole, it's fixed. So I do think we are going to fix global warming, except there's an ontological trap there. You're not allowed to say that it's fixable, because if you say it's fixable, then it's never going to get fixed. So right now, the one thing on Earth, I guess the most cancelable thing on Earth right now is optimism. But I still like to think of myself as an optimism. So just quickly, on the left there, those are cans of spray snow that we used to use on trees in the 50s and 60s. But they're encased in plastic. It's sort of an example of ecological hubris. And then on the right are just various projects I've done with the local aquarium, what have you. So, I mean, this is all to say I am an optimist, and I think there is hope at the end of all this. This is not all just negativity.
We have run out of time. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Steffi. Thank you, Heiko. Thanks. And Felicitas and everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.